Well, then let's move from India to Africa. And you're gonna make it? Or shall we use the pre-recorded version? Rodney, floor is yours.
So thank you very much for staying for this marathon 2-hour session of presentations. If you need to stand up and stretch, feel free to do so. I'm talking today about a project we did. We prepared an environmental and social impact assessment for a highway upgrade in Kenya. And we, as part of that project, we did some connectivity modelling for wildlife to inform the planning and design of the road. So it's about 180 kilometres of road to the north of Nairobi in Kenya. It's an existing road and it's going to be made into two lanes in each direction. It's an existing road, but it's probably already 4 lanes in each direction when you're actually on the road, and the number of cars and the way they're driving, they're right next to each other, and it's crazy. So duplicating it, it's a major route for transport to the interior of Africa. So it's a major critical sort of asset for the country. In addition to the duplication, adding service lanes, bridges, intersections, and a bunch of other things. Interesting thing is the entire project can be built within the existing road reservation. So there's no habitat loss associated with the road in terms of widening the reservation for the road. Importantly, the road goes through a really diverse landscape. A bit hard to see, but some of those hashed areas are either protected areas or forested areas. There's a number of private conservancies that are on both sides of the road. That conservancy, those conservancies are connected at the moment. So there's some existing underpasses for farm machinery, but there's gates at the moment, so they're not open to wildlife. And because they're private conservancies, the landowners, they treat the wildlife as their assets, and they're very interested in the project. They're also interested to try and get as much out of the project as possible. So a bigger underpass for bigger machinery would be much appreciated by them. We know, we've all seen these, lots and lots of impacts to wildlife. The key focus for us was about roadkill and the barrier effect. The process for the connectivity modelling, we did literature review, we spoke to locals and stakeholders. We looked or tried to find roadkill information. There wasn't a lot out there. It was also not very specific. So they said, yes, we see species X, Y, and Z getting killed. We don't know how often. We don't actually know where that was happening. We did broad-scale surveys to inform the impact assessment across the whole 180 kilometres, targeting all the different species groups. And we also had cameras that were deployed within the study area. The camera traps, though, we couldn't put them everywhere because it's a lot of it's publicly accessible land, and even the private land's not very secure, so we had to keep the cameras within the private conservancies, which is most secure locations for the cameras. We even had a few getting stolen from those areas anyway. We did habitat suitability modelling for a number of key species, which I'll go into in a moment. And then we did the landscape resistance and animal movement modelling. A key thing we had to try and think about here was this is a project being funded by the World Bank. There's some critically endangered species, so we had to try and get to a no net loss position or a net gain depending on the species, which was a really difficult process because we're not actually we're not losing habitat, and we technically, parts of the road's already fenced. So it was really difficult to try and figure out how much connectivity would result in a net increase or a net gain or net loss. And that took a lot of work to try and figure out. but I'm not talking about that today. I'm happy to chat about it if anyone's interested. So these are the 2 private conservancies. The little red squares are where our cameras were. These were internet or mobile phone enabled, so we could put them, the information would come in via the mobile phone network. They were out there for about 115 days. We got 640 odd thousand photos, and we were able to use artificial intelligence to go through and sort the photos and identify them. Luckily, as you can see, things like giraffe and zebras and other species are quite identifiable. So they're uniquely patterned, etc., different shapes. We could do that into artificial network, artificial intelligence. Identification of the photos was very accurate. A range of species were detected, and it worked quite well. I've already explained this. Basically, the cameras or the automated analysis of the image. Each one of these rows represents a camera, and the different colours of the little hashes, which you can't actually see very well, but essentially the most common species we found were zebras, and the buffalo and the giraffe were fairly restricted in their locations. And these were the 3 species that we were focusing on: the buffalo, the giraffe and the zebra, because they're large, so if you have collisions with those, there's going to be big problems for the passengers and also for the wildlife. We also made the assumption that by providing habitat for these species, many of the other species would also be allowed for. This is just another way of showing the results of the camera surveys, and you can probably see that a bit better there. The yellow in this case are the giraffe, and the yellow is the zebra. The giraffe is in green and the buffalo's in red. And so the proportions of each circle represents the proportion of photos of each of those species. In terms of the modelling, so once we've got all this information in, we used a circuitscape and process to identify where the habitat is for the species, and then where are those main connections that we needed to try and conserve or create potentially. As I said, the 3 target species were giraffe, the zebra and the buffalo. In addition to this, we also got a whole bunch of information from the publicly available information on species records. So we developed habitat suitability models for the 3 species using Maxent, which is a presence-only modelling system. We then identified core habitat from that and mapped it, and then looked at the connectivity between those core patches of habitat. And so for the 3 species, we've got buffalo, giraffe across the top and zebra in the bottom. You can just see that they're different, they have different requirements, there's different habitat for them, and the darker the colour, the more suitable the habitat for those different species. What was also quite different with this project is often when we're doing impact assessments and planning for road and rail projects, we have quite narrow corridors of investigation. In this case, we're up to about 170 kilometres from the road itself that's a study area we used. We had to push pretty hard for this because normally it's, the road is this big and we're allowed to look maybe that much further. So this is quite unique in terms of the spatial scale. I'm just going to show the results for the giraffe here. You can see the patches of habitat in green. The importance of that patch based on its size is shown by the circle. The larger the circle, the more important. And then there are the linkages in the dark black lines. And again, the thicker the black line, the more important the link. And the sort of blue lines that are moving through across the screen there, they represent isolated nodes or groups of populations. 3, okay, 3 is good. And this is basically then that information converted into least cost paths, and that was really important to help inform where the crossing structures should go. in the beginning of the process, the whole mitigation plan was basically based on a few people getting together about 5 years ago in a room and saying they should be here, here, here and here. And on 180 kilometres worth of road, there were 9 crossings identified as being required. Through this process, we identified a bunch more. We could prioritise them in terms of their contribution to connectivity. And in the the stage we're up to now is trying to integrate the need for connectivity into the design of the road. So, for example, how tall does an underpass need to be for giraffe? And how wide should a land bridge be for giraffe? Because they can look over. 2 metre noise walls in Sweden, probably not going to be enough to protect the giraffe. So a bunch of things there. Also some canopy bridges for arboreal species, for primates, a number of underpasses. There's also some work to improve connectivity on another road. So we're providing connectivity for a Kenyan Wildlife Service sanctuary that's on both sides of the road, but also another connection out to the side, away from the road, away from the road we studied, but there's another road that we're working on as well. And I think a couple of things about this project that I think makes it worthy of sharing was the spatial scale at which we worked, and also the inclusion of connectivity modelling in impact assessments, which doesn't happen very often, certainly doesn't happen in Africa, and hopefully this sets a bar for future ones. So thank you. Be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Rod. There are questions. Darrel.
Thanks, Rod. I know this country pretty well. To what extent were local people involved in any of the decision making? Is that part of the process at all?
So we did an ESIA, which is an environmental and social impact assessment. Most of the work was probably social engagement with the community, stakeholder engagement around a whole lot of things. So there's lots of small settlements on the side of the road, little markets, and when the road's being widened, they're all getting impacted. The local community, in terms of decisions about wildlife and connectivity, the owners of the conservancies were very engaged, and the Kenyan Wildlife Service were very engaged.
Right, so are those conservancies used by the local people to attract tourists? Is that what they're for, as well as conservation?
Are these presentations being recorded? Okay. Yes.
Okay.
We'll talk later.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? One space for one, time for one more question, please.
Hi, thank you. That was really interesting. I was just wondering if you had the opportunity to take climate change into account, when you modelize the connectivity and the fact that maybe these biodiversity patches might move over time, because a highway is supposed to last more than 50 years. So I was just wondering how you managed that.
It can be taken into account, but we did not. I guess there's always time constraints in these sort of projects, and having limited information about the predicted impacts of climate change in that particular area, we didn't know, so we didn't include it. But I think it should be. I think it's an important, really important question. And I don't know, I actually haven't seen anything this week about climate change and how that might impact what we do.
Yeah, a good question. So thank you very much for your